have served the U.S. government and helped become a very important practitioner of strategy. Unfortunately, these days we're seeing more vision and less strategy in the region, and we would, hope that that would one day continue. But we're obviously, many of us are disappointed with the level of U.S. government interest in the South Caucasus and in the Caspian region. And we hope that someday that this may become, once again, reach the vibrant levels that it once did. So as President of Jamestown, I want to welcome everyone here today, those that are watching us online from all over the world. We're very much happy that you're able to participate and watch this event. We're always delighted to have everyone participate, support Jamestown in what ways they can. We regret that we didn't have more space for this event. We had a very long, extensive waiting list, but because of the sudden nature of this event, we couldn't find another facility, and so we decided to do it here at Jamestown. But we're glad that you're here. We're glad that there are people watching online. Vlad will go second after Matt, and we'll have questions and answers. We have ample time for that. I'm sure many of you have questions for Matt on his views of the region, which we are eagerly waiting to hear. So without further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Matt Bryza. And Matt.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you, sir. What an honor to be here, Glenn. Thank you for hosting me, for tracking me down. Somehow you found me when I was wandering the streets of Baku, when I headed back there with my family to celebrate Easter, of all places. I know it sounds strange. I could explain that later. But it's actually emotionally overwhelming to see who's here. And people who've given time from unbelievable schedules with other competing events in town. I'll talk about Ambassador Fried in a second, but particularly Turkish friends. Tuncay Babali is here, who is he's the head of personnel for the Turkish Foreign Ministry. And in case anybody missed it, or thank you for coming here instead, but there's a fantastic lecture, the Sabancı Lecture in the Turkey program at Brookings Institute happening right now. Dr. Brzezinski is giving the lecture. Tuncay, thank you for coming here, and also Ali Aslan from Zaman newspaper, the same. I saw Ali coming in, I don't know where he is. Thank you, thank you for, and everybody else who chose to come here for some bizarre reason rather than that event. Ambassador Fried, if it wasn't for you, I don't know what the heck would have happened in my career. I certainly wouldn't be standing here, I'll tell you that much. But my whole career is so tied to Dan Fried, beginning my first tour in Poland, which was just an unbelievable birth by fire as the Solidarity movement was taking over Polish government. Dan was my boss, I had the political section, taught me my most important career lessons, both how to do the job, but also philosophically how to look at it. And also, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be standing here because of all the chances you gave me at the NSC, back at the State Department when it was risky to take a more junior guy like me and put him in the position of Deputy Assistant Secretary, allow me to make a bunch of mistakes. So I'm grateful beyond words, although I'm trying to express some now. So many other friends who are here. I'm sorry if I probably shouldn't recognize everybody because it'll take forever, but some of you have been so close to me for years and years, and around the world, you've opened your doors to your presidents like you, Simonas, or your family, Hediye, to Zaino and me. Randy, you've been one of the great strategic influences on me thinking about the Caucasus as well. So thank you all for being here. If I haven't run out of time already, I just would like to make a few observations about the strategic value of the South Caucasus, and then a few thoughts on tactically how I think we might have missed some pretty big opportunities, which we can still embrace, but some I think have probably passed. And then it's time to pick up the pieces and see if we can make the best out of a more difficult situation. For years, when we've talked about, we, Dan and I, or people that work together with us have talked about the South Caucasus, we've talked about three sets of strategic interests that motivate U.S. policy, should motivate U.S. policy, that are related to Russia, our neighbor next door, but are not Russocentric, but are inherently of deep strategic importance for the United States and for the three countries of the South Caucasus. And I know that everybody working these issues in the U.S. government now thinks we're still doing that and focusing on those issues, but I also know that the countries in the region don't think that's the case. They don't feel that. They feel very much adrift. And they felt that, I think, since, God rest his soul, Ron Asmus put together a letter a couple of years ago that expressed, through the words of the Central and Eastern European leaders themselves, a sense of neglect and a sense of being ignored. I think what that reflected was a sense of us having dropped our focus on these three strategic interests I'll mention in a second, and a desire to do something new, something fresh, something different from what the last team had been doing, and something that ended up being very much Russo-centric. Of course, you can't do anything in the South Caucasus without thinking about Russia and without figuring out how to both bring it along and to prevent it from meddling. But again, these three strategic interests are inherent to the United States and to the three countries of the South Caucasus, and so they should be our perennial foci. So those are, and in no particular order: security, security ranging from counterterrorism, counterproliferation, conflict resolution, to non-proliferation. Energy, which really put the South Caucasus on the map in terms of the first generation in the Clinton administration of oil and gas pipelines. And now the next generation that Dan Stein and Ambassador Morningstar and all of us have been working on to move or to help Europe diversify its supplies of natural gas through the movement of vast new resources, first from Azerbaijan, then hopefully from Turkmenistan and maybe Iraq to Europe. And then internal reform, the third set of interests. So security, energy, and internal reform. Internal reform must be a priority. If it's not, and if it's not moving forward at a pace that's similar to the progress we make on energy and on security, we can't have sustainable partnerships with the countries of the South Caucasus because internally there won't be stability. At the same time, I think in the last couple of years, we have sometimes focused excessively in a couple of the countries on the internal reform agenda and lost sight, in some cases, of the energy significance or the security significance, and felt almost embarrassed to pursue a strong partnership with, especially with Azerbaijan, but also with Georgia, on security and on energy, when in fact we saw setbacks or slow movement on internal reform in those countries. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So operationally, what do we need to be doing on each of these things? Operationally, I would argue there's no issue right now that's more significant to maintain our successful pursuit of all three sets of interests than doing all we can to facilitate a breakthrough in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Nagorno-Karabakh has the possibility to erupt again into armed conflict. I don't think that's a likely outcome. I think that the conflict is pretty much contained now. I don't share the analysis of some who say that an incident along the line of contact could easily spin out of control and lead to a war by miscalculation. I don't think that's possible. I think the Azerbaijani government has deployed its forces in such a way that that sort of a miscalculation simply cannot happen. If the Azerbaijani government, if the Azerbaijani government decides that it seeks to use military means in Nagorno-Karabakh, we will know. We will see significant movements of military forces from the eastern part of Azerbaijan, where they're overwhelmingly deployed, to the western part. But day to day, there really is no chance that a shooting incident along the line of contact will escalate uncontrollably into a military conflict, a large-scale military conflict, unless there's the intent to do so. I would argue in Azerbaijan there is no intent now for a military conflict to evolve or devolve in Nagorno-Karabakh. The government of Azerbaijan's strong priority is to advance its economic transformation, in some ways almost miraculous transformation, a transformation that is penetrating beyond the gleam and the glitz of Baku and is actually palpable in the regions of Azerbaijan. Perhaps not as dramatically as in the capital, but it's palpable. President Aliyev has decided that his country's long-term security and his legacy depend upon securing that economic transformation, sustaining it, and diversifying the economy beyond the energy sector, which requires a lot more work than has been put into place thus far, but is occurring. So I think it's not logical or conceivable that the government of Azerbaijan would stumble into a war right now over Karabakh or would launch one. As President Aliyev has made clear, when he gave his famous speech now last June during the military parade, the big military parade in Baku, he was attacked for martial language and for sounding belligerent, at least according to some people, sounding as if Azerbaijan was preparing to use military force. What he says to describe or to explain that speech, however, is quite different. He says that speech is the first time he spoke to a military audience without talking about the threat of force. So from his perspective, he argues, he is actually trying to contain nationalistic fervor that could lead some in Azerbaijan to want to pursue a military solution with full knowledge that that solution really would jeopardize everything Azerbaijan is trying to do on the economic side. And similarly, of course, in Armenia, there's no chance that Armenia, in my mind, would want to launch a war. There's speculation that perhaps someone could compel the Armenians perhaps to want to provoke a response by the Azerbaijanis and create an escalatory ladder that could serve some sort of a political purpose in Armenia. I don't buy that. I don't think the Armenian side wants to risk an armed conflict, and I think Armenia's biggest concern is indeed security, maintaining security and reducing the risk of war in the long run. That's not to say that both sides don't posture. And Azerbaijan does use its growing military strength and the possibility at some day that if there's no progress on the political track, there could be a military solution on the table. You often hear the phrase, all options are on the table. True. But that rhetoric is used more, I would argue, as a tool for diplomatic negotiation rather than as a reflection of a plan by the government of Azerbaijan to use military force. So, where are we on Nagorno-Karabakh? The parties have gotten very close through the Minsk Group process. The draft agreement that's on the table provides an outline that should be mutually acceptable to both sides. It's been negotiated by the presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's been accepted by much of civil society, well, by some of civil society in both countries, but overwhelmingly does not enjoy the populations of either country's support. And civil society at large does not support what's been put on the table because such difficult political compromises are required on both sides. What I'm saying in a different way is that the presidents are out ahead of their populations in what they have agreed to in principle, though of course nothing's agreed until everything's agreed. But the presidents themselves have gone quite a distance in putting on the table a framework that will require very difficult political consequences, but does hold promise for a lasting solution. The problem is that neither president trusts his counterpart sufficiently to take the final step and agree in a declaratory way that this basic framework that's on the table will provide the foundation for a full peace agreement that would be negotiated later. So we're going to see stagnation in the Nagorno-Karabakh peace process until the two presidents feel trust with each other. And that trust, I would argue, isn't going to come until the United States leans in. I would say, of course, together with its Minsk Group co-chair partners, the Russian government and the French government, but it really requires the United States government to lead it at a very senior level and break the ice between Presidents Sarkisian and Aliyev and help them establish that trust that's necessary for them to finalize the framework that's on the table. If that doesn't happen, I'm not arguing that in the immediate future there will be an armed conflict, but over time, if this situation is allowed to stagnate, the risk of a military conflict increases with each month or each year that passes. And that's because in Azerbaijan, the sentiment to restore the country's territorial integrity is genuine, it's powerful throughout the society, and each year that passes, there are fewer and fewer Azerbaijanis alive who have ever lived with Armenians. And the same is true in Armenia. Each year that passes, there are fewer and fewer Armenians alive who have lived together with Azerbaijanis and remember what it was like to be able to live in one common community. And so the danger is that time is on no one's side because as time passes, the nationalist lines grow stronger, firmer, and perhaps more brittle. And so I would argue that the only way Azerbaijan would ever decide it makes sense to use force is if Azerbaijan were to lose confidence, fully lose confidence in the Minsk Group process. So for that reason alone, to keep the peace in the region, it's crucial that the United States government and its friends and allies who care about the South Caucasus focus as much effort as possible on getting that breakthrough in Nagorno-Karabakh. I'm not going to speculate on what would happen if there were an armed conflict. That will lead to strange headlines and interpretations. I'll just say that's, I think, where we should be putting our focus. Turkey-Armenia normalization is also a very important process for a series of other reasons. It would be historically so significant. Turkey-Armenia normalization would be politically beneficial to our leadership here in the United States. Turkey-Armenia normalization would be good for the Armenian people, would be good for Turkish people, it would lead to an increase in trade, it would catalyze economic development in Armenia, and if it were achievable, could reduce tension with Azerbaijan. But it's not achievable, completely unachievable, in the absence of a breakthrough on Nagorno-Karabakh. This is an area where I think Washington lost its way in the last couple of years. Washington decided that it was too much to ask for, to push for a breakthrough in Nagorno-Karabakh and Turkey-Armenia normalization. And so Washington decided to put all of its eggs in the basket of trying to get Turkey and Armenia to reach that historic diplomatic breakthrough. But by so doing, we doom the prospects for both a breakthrough on Karabakh and for Turkey-Armenia normalization. I would argue, had we succeeded, at least, in putting our eggs in the basket of getting a breakthrough on Karabakh, we could have achieved both the Turkey-Armenia normalization and the Karabakh Framework Agreement. But instead, we got nothing. And why is that? The reality is that no matter how much we want Turkey-Armenia normalization, Azerbaijan doesn't. And Azerbaijan's friends in Turkey do not, in the absence of a breakthrough on Nagorno-Karabakh. The logic is plain and simple, right? Turkey closed its border with Armenia out of solidarity with Azerbaijan, right? When the war happened and the territories around Nagorno-Karabakh, the Azerbaijani territories then, were occupied by Armenian forces. And so the Turkish government understandably says, we are not ready to reopen that border until the conditions that required it to be closed are lifted. Turkish officials have flirted with the notion of moving forward anyway, despite Azerbaijan's objections, and found it was politically infeasible. So the way out of this conundrum is to use constructive ambiguity as our ally. The way out of this is to make clear that progress on one of those two processes will facilitate progress on the other one. It's not to say that the two issues are explicitly connected. Armenia won't allow the two processes to be described as being connected explicitly. But using ambiguity to say progress on one helps the other is different than saying they're both connected, and is different than what we decided to do, which is to say the two processes are explicitly disconnected. When we did that, when we said there is no connection at all between our push for a breakthrough on Turkey-Armenia and a breakthrough on Nagorno-Karabakh, we denied Azerbaijan all the leverage that it thought was crucial to eliciting a cooperative response from Armenia by virtue of giving to Armenia up front one of the major payoffs that was supposed to come at the end of the full negotiating process. So in any negotiation, if you give one of the parties what they seek at the end of the process, of course that party is going to toughen its position in the midst of the negotiation, which is exactly what happened with Armenia. And we saw in late 2009 and early 2010, the Armenian government walked back some of what it had already agreed, but in some very crucial ways, which I could go into in question and answer session, but just leave it at that. The main point being that if you want to see Turkey-Armenia normalization, you have to see a breakthrough coming on Nagorno-Karabakh. Not a final agreement, not necessarily even full articulation of the framework that will lead to the full peace agreement, but there needs to be some significant breakthrough that gives the Azerbaijani side and Azerbaijan's friends in Turkey a sense that Azerbaijan is not abandoned and that, in fact, its leverage is not undercut. Pulling all those strategic factors together in the case of Azerbaijan, I think we were able to illustrate another way why Azerbaijan is so significant to us strategically in a way that we sometimes forget about. Azerbaijan is a secular state with a Muslim majority population, but a Shiite majority with traditions of religious diversity, with a Jewish community that's been there for centuries, with a Catholic community whose church was built by the government of Azerbaijan, with other Christian minorities. So it's a Shiite majority with a diverse religious population, the only country in the world that sits on the borders with both Russia and Iran simultaneously, and a country that claims to be the ethnic homeland to 25% of Iran's population, its ethnic Iranian population. And finally, a country that has decided that its strategic existence depends upon its physical connectivity to the Euro-Atlantic community through energy pipelines. I have not yet mentioned that its energy is important for the Euro-Atlantic community, but simply from a strategic perspective, that's an amazingly useful friend to have in the world today. And so cultivating that relationship, even if we find aspects of the internal reform process unsavory, too slow, is worth the effort, I would argue. We risk and have risked writing off Azerbaijan as being too difficult, too broken, too unreformable to be worth the effort. And we do that at our own strategic peril. That's not to say that we shouldn't keep pressing for internal reform in Azerbaijan, because in the long run, I think President Aliyev himself would be one of the first to admit, without modernization of the political system and the economic system, Azerbaijan's progress is not sustainable. But if we write the place off as being too difficult and sort of snicker in the background and assume that it's just broken beyond repair, we've lost sight of some of our core strategic interests. I've gone on for enough. I just want to say one last word about energy. So, and Dan Stein is here, who can illuminate us as well on the progress of the Southern Corridor. Energy for the United States and Caspian energy is not significant in terms of any consumption that our country will ever derive from Caspian energy resources. Our interest in Caspian energy is purely strategic, except for a few American companies that are operating in the region. But in Azerbaijan, the American presence is minor, minimal. There's nobody involved from American companies in the Shah Deniz gas consortium, right? On the oil side, yes, there are some American companies, but no American company was a supporter of the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan oil pipeline. And in fact, American companies hated when we were working on it in the beginning, saying, how dare you American bureaucrats get in the way of our corporate decisions? Now, in hindsight, they say, wow, that was pretty good. And for BP, the upstream production in Azerbaijan, which gets to market through Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, is one of BP's, if not its most economically efficient operations anywhere in the world. So we receive a lot of thanks now for being so difficult back in the mid and late 1990s, which is great. But that's oil that will not be consumed in the United States. That's oil that will be consumed by our allies, and that will make our allies more comfortable, more secure, and hopefully more willing to stand with us when things get difficult in the South Caucasus. Now we're engaged in supporting a new effort, a new generation of natural gas pipelines, the Southern Corridor, that will first and foremost link Azerbaijan's massive new production in the Shah Deniz field to European markets. A lot of people get confused about whether or not we support one pipeline or another. In Europe in particular, everybody focuses on Nabucco, the Nabucco pipeline. Nabucco is only one possible pipeline that could comprise the Southern Corridor, which could also consist of Trans-Anatolian pipeline, so Azerbaijan-Turkey pipeline that would get the gas to the Turkish-Bulgarian and Turkish-Greek border. From there, the gas could move up to Austria through the Nabucco pipeline, or a smaller version of it, or the gas could stay in southeastern Europe and be consumed in the Eastern Balkans through a network of smaller pipelines called the Southeast Europe Pipeline Network that BP favors. Or some of that gas could make its way to Italy via the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline that Switzerland supports, that Norway supports, that I'm not sure if Italy supports, and I sense that Greece doesn't quite support right now, but in my new private sector life, by the way, I'm happy to report to our Swiss friends, I've been pushing that one very hard, because we're at a moment right now where Gazprom is making a bid to acquire Greece's pipeline network. If they do, Gazprom will lock up the other route that could bring gas from Azerbaijan to Greece and Italy, which was the Italy-Turkey-Greece pipeline. So the Trans-Adriatic pipeline could provide an alternative that would be privately owned, that would not be, and therefore, owned by Gazprom, and would allow Greece and Albania to develop a corridor to Italy that would be independent of monopolist pressures. Vlad will talk about the positive and negative sides of the TAP pipeline. He's not a supporter of that one, but I look forward to his remarks on that he's about to make. He'll make a strong statement about how the real goal ought to be to make sure that the southeastern European states have a chance to diversify their gas supplies away from one monopolistic supplier, which is Gazprom, which I agree with. At the end of the day, I think which pipeline wins is not so important, however. Pipelines are necessary. Without diversified flows of natural gas, monopolistic pressures can build. But at the end of the day, what really matters is that markets form and that natural gas is traded in spot markets according to the market forces of supply and demand, and not according to long-term contracts that are tied to the oil price and can be manipulated by monopolists. The evolution of gas trading hubs is happening. Spot markets are evolving in Northern Europe, and increasingly around the Baltic Basin. Consumers of natural gas are demanding access to spot market pricing. Hungary and other countries in Central Europe have played a central role in trying to develop a network of smaller pipelines that will allow gas to move through Central Europe according to signals sent by the forces of supply and demand, again, rather than long-term contracts. And it's the proliferation of those gas trading hubs from Northern Europe and the North Sea Basin into Central Europe, and then northeastwardly into the Baltic region, that will lead to the defeat of monopolist forces, no matter how many pipelines they wish to build. So I think we should keep our eyes focused on developing those market forces and supporting the EU initiative through its third energy package and over a decade of efforts to create a genuine natural gas market. I will stop there. There's a lot to say about Georgia and Armenia as well, but I know Vlad's going to talk about Georgia too, and then we'll have a great discussion about Georgia as well. So thank you very much for your patience and for listening.